Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Catafo. I run West Coast Go-to-Market at SecurityPal, and joining us on today's episode of In Security is Morey Haber, Chief Security Advisor at BeyondTrust, and author of 5 books and soon to be 6. Today, our topic is identity attack vectors. And if you're actually wondering, Morey has literally written the book on that. In fact, I'm pretty sure soon to be 2 books on that. So thanks for joining us, Morey. Welcome. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure speaking with you today.
So before we get into our topic of the day, you recently changed roles at BeyondTrust and moved from Chief Security Officer to Chief Security Advisor. Would love to hear the story behind that and learn a little bit more about your day-to-day.
Certainly. It's been a journey, if nothing else. In 2018, Baumgar bought BeyondTrust, Avecto, and Lieberman. And I came over with the executive team as the CTO, CSO, running an evangelist team, and in charge of GRC. As the company has grown, and we've done very well, I've shed some of those departments just based on the sheer bandwidth of what I'm capable of doing myself and with my team. After a recent breach, not on our side, only an incident for us, we'll probably get into that a little later, it was a decision. How do we start educating people on what identity security is and what identity attack vectors are? So with conversations with my team leads, I decided, let me pick up more of my passion, writing, public speaking, going out in the field and educating on latest threats. And I turned over my CSO responsibilities to a new CISO and therefore picked up a new title, Chief Security Advisor, took my evangelist team, and now we are dedicated to education, speaking, and architectures for privileged access and identity security solutions.
Wow, super cool. So you're spending, it sounds like you're doing a lot of kind of a mix of like marketing, public speaking. Are you spending a lot of time with customers too and like meeting with customers or?
Yeah, so the role is quite diverse. I will continue writing. That's a passion of mine. As you indicated, 5 books published, a 6th one coming, which is a 2nd edition of Identity Attack Vectors. I do a lot of blog writing, as well as a variety of speaking to clients on security best practices and clients worldwide. The educational process doesn't just, go, hey, go here, visit this client, or go do that. I do get invited and speak at worldwide events, some paid, some invitation, to really raise awareness of what the latest security threats are related to identities and accounts. Clients, public speaking, writing, yeah, it is a little bit of a marketing role. It's a little bit of an evangelist role, but it's mostly an educational role to help customers understand what the threats are and what the best security controls are for mitigating them.
Love it. I'm excited to get into that today because I think there's obviously some of the sort of evolving challenges like this attack vector, I'm sure, has evolved over the last few years in particular with AI. And then there's like, okay, there's the problem and like also some of the issues with like what bad actors are doing. And then there's also like solutions. And I'm sure we're going to get a chance to dig into both of those. Before we do that, I'm curious, like, so you've written 5 books all on different attack vectors. And I know I have your 2nd edition coming out of identity attack vectors. Curious, like how you got into doing that and when did you write your first book?
The first book came out, I'm going to say 16 or 17. To be honest, I don't remember exactly. It was a long process, but it really was written, as silly as it sounds, on a dare. I've always been a prolific writer. It's kind of crazy. I've always written blogs. I did a lot of writing in school. It's an outlet for me. It's a creative outlet for me, as well as educational. Some people will paint. Some people will have other creative outlets. For me, it's writing. Essentially, with all the content that I had written prior to that, my boss at the time basically was like, I think you could write a book. Like, you want me to write a book? And it kind of came out in the conversation, I dare you to try. So we had met with a publisher out at RSA back then, and they ran me through all of the steps. And they actually seemed like, we do a lot of these calls. We take a lot of people that want to write a book, and they never get anywhere. Well, 6 months later, they had their first draft manuscript. And after walking through the process, it really wasn't that hard. So we've been cranking out about 1 a year since then. Took a hiatus for 8 months after breaking my hand. Whole different story. You can't type with a broken hand. and now we have another one, and we're actually discussing what's coming next. So we've got a lot of ideas on the table as to the next attack vector series. But literally, it was a dare to get me started.
That is hysterical. Well, I guess it's worked out pretty well, and clearly
Yes.
you've picked up a knack for doing it. If you're on number six, particularly in like such a short period of time,
It's not hard. People ask how you write books. And the first thing is look, just write an outline. I mean, basic elementary school outline, and go granular. Every light item, put another layer, another layer, another layer, and you're going to find you're going to start writing sentences in between. And sooner or later, you're nearly done. But books can be published in a variety of ways. You can self-publish, which is what many of my peers do. There's no money, no fame, no gain. There's really no copyright either. It's just out there. You can pay a publisher to print your book. That is the recommended. That is not the recommended way to do it, because you're basically like a music studio paying a music studio to take your music, and good luck if you're going to make any royalties. Or you find a publisher that believes in you. They will give you an advance based on the outline and a sample of it. It's normally pretty minimal, but based on the sales, you start getting income. Now, I'm not going to be able to retire by any stretch. It's not a significant amount. But when you start adding multiple books and you start getting recognition, it's not the money that matters, it's the reputation. You do get invited to speak at conferences. You are able to sign a copy of whichever book a client may be interested in and be the expert in that conversation. That's not an ego thing. That is, I've sat down, thought through this, done the research, had it proofread by a fellow peer and published. And it covered the books cover everything from privileges to vulnerability and patch to identity, and even how to secure the cloud as a part of the whole attack vector series.
nice. And I saw most of your books are co-authored too, right? You wrote them with other security leaders?
I have. So one was my former CTO. One was second edition was me solo. Another was published with two of my direct reports who are experts in their own field. I have two gentlemen that work for me, or had two gentlemen that work for me. One was an expert in certain aspects of cloud. The other is, in my opinion, a regulatory genius in terms of mappings and understandings. So they did certain sections within the book. The last piece is also done with an analyst. He was a former CTO. His name is Darren Rolls, if anybody cares. He is now an analyst and consultant, and he co-authored the first book and second book with me. Because many times when you're writing a technical cybersecurity book, you can put down your ideas, but you need to bounce them off of someone to make sure that any future thinking or conclusions are viable for a large community. And having a peer that understands them at that depth really goes a long way in the co-author, or at least making sure that it's acceptable by the larger community.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And it seems like a great idea. I feel like writing oftentimes can be a team sport. And particularly like when you're this type of domain expertise, I imagine even most security leaders out there like have one expertise in one particular area versus like, you know, it's probably rare you'd find somebody who's like technically, you know, and governance and, you know, privacy, like an expert in all three of those is probably pretty hard to find.
It is. It's really hard. And when someone that you meet that's new into the security industry, how do I get in? What do I do? Well, what is your passion? Do you like log? Do you like patch? Do you like threat hunting? Do you like forensics? Red team, blue team, purple team. You take the deep breath. Luckily, I have an analogy that kind of works. It's a medical community almost. Are you a brain surgeon? Are you a foot surgeon? Are you general surgeon? Do you look at x-rays? What kind of doctor are you? Just because you're a general practitioner doesn't mean you know how to do brain surgery. The same is true for good security professionals. They know their discipline. They understand what the others entail, but that is by no means something that you would ask a general physician to do open heart surgery.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I've never heard it put that way, but that's probably the most interesting analogy I've heard. And it's funny, I was just talking to a gentleman who works at a large healthcare organization and specifically does offensive security. And I'd never seen a title like that. I was like, oh, that's a super cool title. What does it mean? It basically like they're simulating attacks. like on a regular basis. He's got a team of folks that do this. They do different types of simulations. It's pretty wild and
Mhm.
pretty genius. So anyway,
It's become that complex of an industry where you need that specialty. And for even the smallest businesses, you may have one guy that runs IT and security, but that's where MSSPs come into play. That's where outside consulting comes into play to make sure that you don't have any of those gaps.
yeah. I mean, it's a great segue into our topic, identity attack vectors.
Mhm.
Obviously, you're very passionate about this. You've written now multiple books on this. I think it's. I'm just curious, one, to hear why this is so top of mind. I know we talked about a breach, our first conversation. So curious, sort of, why this is the thing that's most top of mind for you, and why it's even been the driver in you changing roles.
Sure. So the first book, Identity Attack Vectors, was released about 4+ years ago, and it focused on the entire identity lifecycle, mainly identity governance, joiner, mover, leaver processes, specialty accounts like privileged accounts, proper session access, etc. And it really that if you're not managing identities in a methodical way, a workflow based way, you're going to end up with rogue identities, faults in the joiner, mover, leaver process, rogue accounts, basically a mess. And compliance, aside, which dictates you got to know where things are, you're really ripe for some form of attack. The second book is almost a complete rewrite. It focuses on identity security. And identity security is very different than IGA. When you think of what's called the identity fabric, which is all of the workflows, policies, and procedures, everything that goes from the creation of an identity to its authentication, authorization, its audit, everything in the life cycle, that is identity security. You have a fabric and the security of the workflows. So that implies that any part of the integrations between any tooling in identity and access management could be exploited. It has a risk surface. So today, it is much easier for a threat actor to log in based on stolen credentials and secrets than hack in. We dealt with hacking in for 20 years. Vulnerabilities, exploits, nation states, 0 days, patching. We still deal with it. But it's much easier for someone to socially engineer, especially with AI, your username and password, or to get you to click on a link or fall for a whaling attack or whatever it may be. So with that in mind, what are we seeing? A huge uptick in security breaches and incidents from household names, some of which have leaked tons of data because an old account was present, an admin right was inappropriately assigned. It is really becoming an interesting problem. So Identity Attack Vector second edition deals with the entire identity security landscape. It's written for beginners. Some intermediate might find it helpful. It goes through the definitions first of roles, personas, electronic personas, physical theft, all the way through how you protect identities. And then it wraps into what are the most important privileged identities, and that's privileged accounts. That's root, admin, and root. Because if a threat actor gets a hold of a privileged account and is undetected or not stopped, it's essentially game over. Everything from ransomware to data exfiltration, etc. So the books are different, even though they're titled the same, but they have evolved as the threat landscape has evolved from just good governance to the security of everything identity today.
Wow, I mean, that's an amazing overview of the two books, and some of the differences. And just in terms of like the whole general topic, I'm curious, like, what are some of the things you're seeing in terms of attacks that are different now than maybe 4 or 5 years ago when you wrote the first book? Like, any nuances or differences of like how bad actors are getting in or stealing identities?
There's a lot of differences. So let's take two examples. Recently in the news, an operating system vendor, we're not going to name the shamed, experienced a spray attack on a legacy site that had global admin rights assigned to one of the accounts without MFA. Breached. The threat actors then added their own identity providers, their own MFA, and went for quite a bit of time unnoticed navigating through the organization.
Ugh.
No vulnerabilities or exploits, just simply testing in an automated way an internet-facing website with common usernames and common passwords until they found one that authenticated. And it happened to lead them to a global admin. Now, you might think that's a one-off type of attack, but that same type of attack happened to another vendor just a few weeks later. Okay, well, start looking around and seeing how many people have their passwords stolen. Social media, banking accounts, etc. Again, one thing to steal it and buy it off the dark web. It's another to brute force it or spray it. But then you also have things like watering holes, MFA fatigue, SIM jacking, vulnerabilities in MFA solutions, et cetera, that have left environments pretty much wide open. And that's on top of still default accounts, on top of all of the other configuration issues we have. Finding those and identifying those, pretty easy, especially if it's internet connected. So we're seeing less of the complex exploits like a 0-day, they still happen, but an easier path with a lot of household names doing it. Now take it to the next step, the second half. Back in October of last year, still a CISO, near Halloween, not trick or treat, but more of my trick or treat nightmare, we saw a single log entry. Basically, it looked like garbage in our SIM. You could have chalked it up to a logging error. However, we develop a tool that does identity security, and it wasn't satisfied that was a logging error. It started doing its work and basically identified that there was some form of session hijacking occurring. Okay, that's really kind of scary because that's not a common attack vector, and it's really quite bad. We started doing our own threat hunting like any other CISO would, digging in with teams, bringing in internal expertise. I'm lucky that I have an amazing CTO that knows how to do a lot of stuff that you go out to paid counsel for. And we determined that there wasn't a single indicator of compromise on premise. No one's machine was compromised. There was no man in the middle. There was nothing. So whatever is going on had to be fully external. And this is well documented on a blog on our website. A couple of podcasts have gone out on it from my team members, etc. We contacted Okta at the time and gave them our results, and they really didn't want to play a game. They didn't want to play with us. They gave us some answers in return that really were unsatisfactory, and we had to press them until they came clean that, yes, their system was compromised, communication paths in their internal network, and it turned out that the communication paths, according to their own blogs and breaches, was a highly secret credential stored in a personal browser's password manager. So the attack vector was against an individual who had stored a corporate secret in a personal storage, then used to compromise. Initially reported over 184 clients, only 3 came forward. Who knows what happened to the other 181? And we were like, we're not going to play a game here. Our product worked. It found something. Dwell time was less than 4 hours. It is an incident. It wasn't a breach. And we felt necessary to call out the affected SaaS solution because all of this happened in the cloud, away from everything. That identity breach with no indicators of compromise on premise, no other details, really started this whole discussion of how do we get a product like we make. Again, I'm lucky I was using my own product that found it out to the wild in a bigger way so people can understand the risks of identity security risks. And luckily, a book written on the topic, already in process. The breach happened, just timing. And do I sit and I continue to run security for the company? Been doing it for 5 years. I can turn it over to someone else, or I can exit to the field and start a large education campaign. And that's where I am today. So kind of like the stars aligned, I guess.
Well, that's great. I mean, it's not great that this happened. It's great that you guys caught it. And I mean, do you think it's the type of thing where like, if you don't have, if for whatever reason you guys weren't eating your own dog food or drinking your own champagne, so to speak, this would have been something that's just really easy to miss and just not notice?
I think almost everybody was missed it. It doesn't matter what logs you were collecting from a variety of places. You would have had to had SIM rules or something else in place to look for this type of event in detail, and you had never seen this type of event before. It's almost impossible to write a SIM rule based on something you don't know about. And session hijacking is one of those that you just don't know. you see things executing without a successful authentication. You have to differentiate the human versus machine, which we have AI in the product to do that. I honestly don't think that there's many systems out there outside of ours that could have done it. Maybe that's a little bit of the marketing in me, but I'd love to know what those 181 other companies did once they got the notification and how long they felt they've been impacted.
Wow. Do you know the other two that reported it?
Mm-hmm. Password One and
Okay.
Cloudflare both have public statements out on it. If any of your listeners wanted,
and were they both customers of yours at the time? Okay,
neither.
Interesting. What I guess I'm curious to get into the details of it, if that's okay. I really just want to know, how did you pinpoint Okta from the logs and?
Sure. So the first message itself, for the more technically minded listeners, essentially had an event where all of the fields, all trusted device, MFA, everything, all the JSON said unknown across the board. The IP address, however, came across as an address from Malaysia. Now, could have been one of my staff, but the fact that everything said unknown would normally be dismissed as a log error. When we reverse looked up that IP address, it showed a DMARC for a popular personal VPN solution. Okay, flag number 1. Then a few minutes later, literally, we saw the session token hijacking in our own product because commands were being executed from that same API into our identity provider, Okta, that were privileged, and attempts to run privileged commands at the same time. But there was no session authentication message. There was nothing that said successful login. Correlating all that together gave us the session hijacking. Now, we were able to figure out fairly quickly who the machine was that the session token was stolen from. Okay, you're using a good EDR solution. You automatically isolate the system. You start interviewing him. Were you surfing? Were you doing? What was happening? And you find out that the only thing he did was, per a support ticket for something not working, was he created a HAR file. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with a HAR file, it's an HTTP archive file, and it does basically a recording of everything in your browser, including the session token. So we knew that that session token was what was being used from the foreign address. So we blocked everything, pulled everything out, again, dwell time 4 hours. How did someone get this session token? Okay, you interview the person. They live in a public, not a public, but an apartment building where the Wi-Fi is public. It's shared throughout the whole building. Could have been a man in the middle attack. Unlikely. The last time someone broke encryption of that nature was a long time ago, and that would be some serious nation state type of equipment to be able to pull that. Unlikely. No malware, no indicators of compromise on their device. The HAR file probably had to have been stolen from somewhere in the support system. So we started reviewing all the logs to say who accessed the support system. We got nothing. Absolutely nothing. That's when we opened a support ticket, literally the same day, going, we're seeing something really weird. Can you tell us who else touched this file? And like I said, the results we got back were pretty garbage, and we had to start pressing and pressing to the point where we have eliminated everything else on premise. Essentially, it had to be that it was stolen. And then 2 weeks later was the come clean. Yes, our support portal was breached. Anybody that opened tickets in this time frame could have had those support tickets exposed. And the threat actor just downloaded all the HAR files they could, because that gave them unrestricted.
Okay, so that now it's all coming together for me. So basically, Okta got breached on the support side. So any recordings or hard files or any screen recordings that were done on the support side were basically all hijacked. And
anybody that in that last few weeks, now it may have been longer, that's never been discussed, that uploaded a ticket with files or sensitive information, the ticket and the attachments were all potentially exposed.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So what, I guess, if you're one of your customers or prospective customers or a security leader out there, where do you start in terms of, one, identifying, do I have the right type of security infrastructure and processes in place to make sure that you're in a position like you were, where you can catch something like this, or I better yet probably prevent it. if it does happen, catch it very quickly and be able to like pinpoint like, okay, actually what happened? Like how do you, I guess, where do you start? And then we could talk about remediation here in a minute.
Well, that goes back to the entire identity and access management, identity security, identity fabric discussion we started with. You have various tools: single sign-on, MFA, IGA, privileged access, SIM, a wide list, right?
Mm-hmm.
The integrations to all of them, because all the vendors talk to each other in a wide variety of ways. One of the major analyst firms calls it a security mesh. Okay, whether you believe in that philosophy or not, you've got a connector. You generally do, and you're sharing information. Are those systems resilient enough to stop an attack? Are the secrets secure enough? Can you rotate the keys? Then you have to look at, okay, I have a cloud-based identity provider. Who else does it talk to in an automated way? Who else would have admin rights from machine to machine? Is it something like a Salesforce? Is it something like a ServiceNow for ticketing? What other systems are potentially attackable, and are those secrets secure? So you really have to start with, do I have security best practices around everything I do identity? That is difficult, near impossible in the largest organizations because of all of the pieces they may have. So then you step back for a second and go, okay, I might have a decent IGA. I might have a decent handle on privileged, always can use improvement. Let me start looking in a place to tell me what's wrong or configured wrong. And then are people using something poorly? Well, that's what our own product does. And I don't want to make this a product pitch, but you need something almost like a vulnerability assessment tool that goes in and says, oh, you left that port open. Oh, these accounts can be executed without MFA and they're high privileged. It is a next generation type of an assessment tool designed for identities. Then you have to look at the other side and say, okay, did any of those identities actually execute with privileges but didn't use MFA? Does any of the accounts have my personal email address in it? Right? There's no reason someone should be running AWS, whatever the cloud may be, using their Gmail account. It should be a business account with a proper owner. So you have both sides, execution and detection, and you can almost look at it going back to the late 1990s as vulnerability assessment for identities. And that's the way you have to look at it. Because that whole assessment piece that I started with, doing it manually would be impossible. But having a tool to do it then makes you be able to find issues like this Okta support breach, or even what that other vendor just went through in their own spray attacks.
Assuming most of your customers, I imagine when you onboard them, they get this assessment, and then there's probably like okay, great, here's your like low hanging fruit of like things that are probably like most critical that you need to like, you should go fix right now. What are some of the most common things you see that you're almost shocked about, that are almost commonplace out there that folks have?
It only takes about 30 minutes to stand up the product. It's kind of surprising.
Oh, wow.
It's all cloud-based, read-only API connectors. It's pretty fast. Some of the more common things that you see are like those personal email addresses. Many times a developer will stand up a cloud instance with their personal account and I don't want to redo this, and they move it to production. You'll see things like a PowerShell being executed with admin rights without MFA. You'll see tons of flaws in dormant accounts or rogue accounts or shadow accounts being out there. Wow, there's an admin account sitting somewhere, hasn't been logged in 8 months, and it has no technical identity. In other words, here's the account, but the system cannot determine who the proper identity is from Entra ID or Okta or Ping. There is no identity owner. So you now have a rogue admin or rogue account that fell out of the joiner, mover, leaver process. And if it's not dormant and no one's keeping an eye on it, or it's never had its password rotated, or worse, a default password, then that's another attack vector. So depending on the individual instance, you'll get this list. What's kind of cool is that when you start seeing the runtime of it, you're going to start seeing the patterns. End user running admin, end user running admin, end user running admin, which means probably a good portion of their end user base still has admin rights. You'll see a lot of dormant accounts. You'll see a lot of shadow accounts. Well, then they have a flaw in IGA. You'll see other types of issues with personal data or hijacking where machines are configured in ways that the token has never been expired or it's just sitting out there. So you'll start seeing patterns of flaws within their own environment as the system runs. But literally out of the gate, you pretty much know I got to remove admin rights. I've got stale accounts. I've got the same account present in different places, but with different passwords. There's not any central management. All sorts of things will bubble up pretty fast.
Wow. And how did like these stale accounts, is it just like somebody gets offboarded and like their email gets deleted or whatever, but like their account doesn't get shut down in a particular, whatever their function is? Like if I'm guessing if it's a developer, maybe they have a GitHub account, but they leave the company or something like that, and it's just still active.
It could be that. It could be that you had a contractor come in and help you. It could be a fault in just in time where the account was created for just in time access, but the process actually failed to delete the account. There's dozens of reasons why you'll find shadow IT accounts outside of someone just going, I'm going to make my own account over here and have access. Just faults in other workflows generally are what cause it.
Can you guys identify shadow IT too? Like, oh yeah, like we found like these different accounts exist that you have like in the cloud. Are you able to do that?
Yeah. So the solution does have a full KIM product built in. Again, don't want to make this about marketing or the product.
I'm genuinely interested. This is really cool for me, and obviously it's a big issue that clearly is leading to a lot of fallout. So
it is. It has full cloud infrastructure entitlement management built in, so you would see those things. But the whole crux of the problem is that identity security is hitting us in a way that reminds me of, I've been in the industry 25 years. Reminds me of the late 1990s, early 2000s, where run a vulnerability scan, go do something, find a problem. Okay, we've been putting in identity solutions now for a decade, and no one has thought of them as attack vectors. Wow, I'm running a really old SMS or push notification system for my multi-factor. You know what? It's probably time to replace it. Okay, where are those flaws? What are those problems?
Yeah, when I worked at Twilio, there's some crazy stuff going on behind the scenes in terms of like how bad actors were hacking SMS, particularly around like the things like SIM swap and whatever, where they get a hold of somebody's account and now all of a sudden they're basically getting your MFA codes and poof, you're in, and you don't even know. And
it happens a lot more than people would like to think about. Unfortunately.
I guess what, if anything, is the craziest thing you've seen from like from a threat perspective? I mean, I've heard of some crazy stuff, but I'm curious what the craziest thing you've seen in terms of like identity attacks that are maybe, again, probably weren't around 3-4 years ago, but are popping up today either because of AI or just bad actors getting crafty.
Yeah, I think that the latest one, which I wrote a blog on not long ago, happened in Hong Kong with CEO and deepfake technology. There is no mitigation for this yet. In fact, we've been working on research for it this week. Essentially, a high-level worker who had capabilities of doing wire transfers and excessive sums was called by his CEO. It wasn't his CEO. It was real-time deepfake video and audio using their preferred communication method. Hey, I need you to do a wire transfer. Whoever the individual was questioned it. The CEO got other peers on the phone to validate it, all of them deepfake. And the man initiated a $25 million wire transfer. Yeah. So think if your Zoom account got compromised and several other executives or teams or whatever it may be, and you received a call with a real-time deepfake image and voice of someone to ask you to do something and you executed it, that's what happened. That's the craziest thing I've heard of recently. It starts from an identity attack. The UCS, the Unified Communication System, was compromised. Deepfake content done in real time convinced a single individual with the power and no other security controls to transfer that much money, and it's gone.
Oh, yeah. I just remember reading that article. It was just like, ouch.
How do you protect against it? There's really not much. But if you start at the identity side first to make sure a UCS system or something else isn't compromised, right, then the communication path would have been outside of normal. They would have used, a WebEx or whatever it may be. And that's not the preferred internal method. That would have raised a flag in itself.
So I'm trying to remember if in the article, did somebody get access to like, was it a Zoom, or was like, how do they like actually make contact? Was it phone or?
From what I understand, it was using a unified communication system, some form of
Okay.
video media, much like you might be watching this podcast.
That is wild. Sorry, you said UCS too. That, yeah, I, in my head while we were talking about it, I'm thinking, I know how like banks do this. They just like, great, like we're gonna call you back at your number and like talk to you and like read off a disclaimer and you're gonna give us authorization, but there's no way to like I've at least found with my bank that you can't like actually do a wire. Like they need to call you back at your contact number again to make sure that like this isn't somebody who's basically hacked your identity calling up to wire money out. You think something like that is like a simple solution for?
It is, but you also have to question the number, the source of the number. If they had access to the communication system in the back end, even the source phone number would look correct. The video might look correct. And the audio, if it's good deep fake, literally fooled the individual.
Yeah. Crazy.
But it all started with the communication system itself being compromised. And that's the key. That brings us all the way back full circle. Every application with identities, MFA, fully secured, and then everything linked together. Because if you're using, let's say, a Zoom and it's not integrated with MFA or your single sign-on solution, you really should, because what can be done with it today can be quite devastating.
Yeah. And I think that's the scariest thing is like 5 years ago, probably hard to pretty fake who I am, but nowadays it's like...
Oh, no, and there's tons of free tools out there. Again, we were doing research this week. Just Google AI voice, AI video, and you give it a sample, like my own voice. It's fairly distinct. I do have a lisp at times. I do pause at times. I've read a specific paragraph for it and give it text. And to my ear, I can't tell the difference. To my family and friends, about 50 of them said, no, it doesn't sound like you. The rest of my family was like, that's pretty darn close. Damn. To a person that doesn't speak to me on a regular basis, you would never know.
That's creepy.
It's everything from the fake kidnapping phone calls to voice messages to all of the threats we've heard about over the years, now coming to a whole new level. Because if you got kids, right? Dad, I'm in prison. I need 50 gift cards to get out. Right?
Yeah.
I can laugh at it, but I could see it happening.
Yeah. If it hasn't happened multiple times to multiple people already, it's scary. Well, I mean, it's been a blast having you on the show. I've gotten a ton out of this. Hopefully, I know our listeners will too. I know we're just about at time. I'm curious, like, what are I guess beyond trust, what's the number? Like, is there like a number one thing, remedy, solution, process, or anything that you recommend for customers or security leaders out there? Like, hey, if you're not doing this, you need to figure out how to do this ASAP from like an identity attack vectors or prevention measures.
Yeah, two recommendations, and then the third will be a joke. The first is just know where all your identities are, especially your root and admin accounts. That holds your crown jewels. If you're not monitoring or removing them, you're ripe for some form of incident. Second, MFA. Look, there is no reason in this day and age you're using single credentials anywhere. Anything an end user can access through the internet or on-prem, MFA, and MFA. And the third is a little bit of a joke. I was speaking overseas last week. It's not my joke. I can't take credit, but the presenter got off stage and he just said, remember, XP Service Pack 2 everywhere. It's your best protection. And I'm like, my God, did I just date myself by hearing that? But for anybody that's been doing this for a while, if you ran with XP, you wanted Service Pack 2 because that's when firewalls got first introduced. So no open ports. Everything is about remote access in this world. You don't want RDP, SSH, or any open port on the internet that an identity attack can occur. Service Pack 2, actually, that's what the firewall is for. So bringing it full circle, that's why it's a joke, but it is a serious recommendation.
Love it. No, I think it's a perfect spot to end our conversation on. I think this has been amazing. Again, I know you're traveling a bunch for work, and you've got a book coming out, so I appreciate you making the time, and would welcome the opportunity to have you back on the show at some point.
You're very welcome. My pleasure speaking with you and all. Be safe. Take care.
Thanks, Morey.